The evening sun dipped low over the city skyline, its golden rays reflecting against the towering glass windows of the prestigious Sterling Heights corporate tower, one of the most recognized landmarks in the bustling financial district. At the ground level, the grand entrance buzzed with life. Expensive cars purred at the driveway, chauffeurs hurriedly opened doors, and well-dressed men and women in sharp suits walked briskly through the revolving glass doors. The air was charged with purpose, the kind of energy that clung to places where business deals worth millions were made and broken. Inside the towering lobby, the atmosphere was equally vibrant. A marble floor stretched out like a polished mirror, reflecting the gleam of chandeliers that hung elegantly from the ceiling. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air, courtesy of the floral arrangements that lined the welcome desk. Uniformed staff moved with practiced efficiency, guiding guests and ensuring everything remained seamless. Security checkpoints were stationed discreetly but firmly, ensuring that no one entered without clearance. On this particular evening, the building was hosting an exclusive corporate gala, a gathering of CEOs, investors, and dignitaries. Everyone who walked through the entrance seemed to carry an air of importance, their presence amplified by tailored clothing, expensive watches, and confident strides. This was not a place for ordinary visitors, and anyone who appeared out of place would be noticed immediately. Stationed at one of the key entry points was Daniel Carter, a seasoned security guard in his late 30s. Standing tall in his neatly pressed navy blue uniform, his posture was straight, his shoulders squared, and his gaze sharp. Years of service had instilled in him a sense of pride in his duty. His job was not just to check passes or wave people through. In his eyes, he was the first line of defense, protecting the sanctity of the building and the people within it. Daniel was the kind of man who took rules seriously. Sometimes too seriously. He had been trained to believe that security was non-negotiable, that no exceptions could be made. Over the years, his rigid adherence to protocol had earned him both respect and criticism. Some admired his discipline, while others found him overbearing. But Daniel did not mind. To him, rules were the backbone of order. Without them, chaos would reign. He carried himself with a quiet authority. Even his tone of voice, when giving instructions, held an edge of command. "Please step aside. Show me your ID. This area is restricted." These were phrases he repeated countless times each day, and he expected compliance without question. He believed in hierarchy, in the idea that those in positions of authority were to be respected, and those below were to obey. It was not arrogance in his mind. It was structure, discipline, and the way the world was supposed to work. On that evening, with dozens of high-profile guests arriving, Daniel felt a heightened sense of responsibility. Every person entering needed to be verified, every potential risk neutralized. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, scanning the crowd with keen eyes, determined not to let anything slip by him. Amidst the stream of glittering gowns and tailored suits, a woman approached quietly. She was unlike the others, where the guests arrived with loud confidence. Her steps were soft, almost hesitant. She wore a modest dress, elegant, but not extravagance. The muted fabric seemed to absorb the light around her rather than reflect it, making her presence feel subdued compared to the sparkle of sequined gowns sweeping past her. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she carried a small clutch in her hand. There was no sign of expensive jewelry, no designer labels on display. In a sea of people flaunting status, she seemed ordinary. Ordinary, almost invisible. Yet there was something in her demeanor, a quiet assurance in the way she carried herself, that set her apart from someone merely out of place. The woman moved with calm, measured steps, her gaze steady and observant. She did not appear flustered by the grandeur around her, nor did she look intimidated. Instead, there was a subtle grace in her composure, as if she belonged in this environment but chose not to draw attention to herself. To Daniel, however, she looked suspicious. She did not match the crowd. She lacked the markers of wealth and status that every other guest seemed to flaunt. To him, she appeared as though she had walked into the wrong building. Or worse, as if she were attempting to sneak into an event where she did not belong. And so, in that moment, the stage was set. The dutiful guard standing as the gatekeeper of order, and the quiet, unassuming woman carrying a truth no one yet knew were about to cross paths. A clash of authority and humility was inevitable, and within seconds it would shake Daniel's assumptions to the core. Daniel's eyes narrowed the moment he noticed the woman approaching his checkpoint. In the sea of polished elegance and business prestige, she was like a muted note in a grand symphony. His instincts sharpened. He shifted his weight slightly, his boots clicking softly against the marble as he positioned himself firmly in her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a tone that was polite on the surface but laced with authority. "This is a private event. May I see your identification or invitation card?" The words rolled out smoothly, but his stance was rigid, almost confrontational. He extended a hand, not rudely, but with the kind of finality that suggested refusal was not an option. His gaze flicked over her modest attire once more, as though confirming his suspicion that she was out of place. The woman paused, her serene eyes meeting his without a trace of nervousness. For a brief second, Daniel was caught off guard. Most people he stopped either fumbled hurriedly for their pasas or grew irritated at the delay. She did neither. She simply regarded him calmly, almost as though she had expected this very moment. With deliberate gentleness, she opened her clutch and retrieved a slim leather card holder. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, and strangely composed. She handed him a card without a word. Daniel took it briskly, his trained eyes scanning the details. It was indeed an official pass for the gala. The embossing, the holographic security strip, everything checked out. Yet something in him resisted. The pass might be genuine, but he still could not reconcile her modest appearance with the kind of powerful figures invited here. "You will need to wait a moment," Isai feveringly, lowering the card, but not stepping aside. "This area is restricted to confirmed guests. I will have to verify your credentials with the event manager before you can proceed." The woman gave a slight nod, showing no sign of impatience. She clasped her hands in front of her and stood quietly, her posture dignified without being defensive. "You seem certain that I do not belong here," she said softly, her voice carrying a calmness that contrasted sharply with Daniel's firm tone. There was no accusation in her words, only observation. Daniel straightened. "Ma'am, I am simply doing my job. We have strict security protocols, and I cannot allow anyone inside without confirmation. I trust you understand." Her lips curved into a faint smile, as if she found his insistence admirable even. "Of course," she said gently. "I respect that you take your duty seriously." By now, a few guests had noticed the exchange. Some slowed their steps, whispering as they cast curious glances at the woman who had been stopped. Others walked by, their eyes flicking dismissively toward her, as if assuming she had no business being at such a prestigious event. Daniel felt the weight of those gazes, too. In his mind, this was the moment to uphold his authority. Allowing someone who looked out of place to pass unchecked could be seen as negligence. He tightened his grip on the pass card, determined to prove he was right to question her. "Ma'am," he continued, his tone firmer now, "these protocols exist for a reason. You cannot simply walk into an event like this without being properly vetted. For all I know, anyone could try to get in. Reporters, protesters, opportunists. I must insist you remain here until clearance is confirmed." Still, the woman's composure never faltered. She did not protest, did not demand, did not even show irritation. Instead, she inclined her head slightly, as though granting him permission to proceed with his checks. Her silence and grace only seemed to magnify the tension. To Daniel, however, her calmness felt almost unsettling. Most people in her position would have grown defensive or exasperated by now, yet she stood there, composed, almost as if she knew something he did not. The air between them thickened. Every second of her quiet patience seemed to challenge his authority in a way words never could. Daniel's pride bristled. He had worked for years to maintain control in his post, and here was a woman who, with her silence, made him question whether he truly held it. He straightened further, his voice sharp but controlled. "Ma'am, I will need you to step aside until further notice. Please do not block the line." For the first time, the woman's gaze soft, almost like a teacher regarding a stubborn student. Her eyes carried no anger, only a depth that suggested understanding beyond what Daniel could grasp. And though she quietly moved to the side as instructed, her dignified silence spoke louder than any protest could have. At that very moment, just as Daniel was about to call for his supervisor to double-check her identity, the first ripple of revelation was about to break. Someone important was approaching. Someone who would unravel the truth behind the mysterious woman's presence. The clash of authority and mystery had reached its peak, and the stage was set for the shocking twist. Just as Daniel was about to radio his supervisor for verification, the lobby's atmosphere shifted. A ripple of movement spread across the grand hall as a new figure entered. The crowd of distinguished guests seemed to pause, their conversations softening, their eyes turning in unison toward the arrival. A tall man in a bespoke charcoal suit strode through the revolving glass doors, his presence commanding immediate respect. His every step exuded power, confidence, and authority. This was Richard Sterling, the chairman of Sterling Heights and the host of the evening Escala. one of the most influential figures in the city's business world. His name was synonymous with prestige, and his approval could open doors most only dreamed of. The staff straightened at once. Receptionists lowered their eyes respectfully. Security personnel adjusted their posture. Even seasoned executives waiting nearby moved aside instinctively, allowing him an unobstructed path. Daniel felt his chest tighten. To him, Sterling was not just the man who signed the paychecks. He was the embodiment of the very order and hierarchy Daniel respected so much. If Sterling noticed him faltering in his duty, the consequences could be severe. And then it happened. Richard Sterling's sharp gaze scanned the lobby and landed directly on the modestly dressed woman standing to the side, exactly where Daniel had ordered her to wait. For a split second, Daniel thought Sterling might signal for her removal, but instead, the man's face transformed. A broad smile spread across his features, his entire demeanor softening with genuine warmth. "There you are," Sterling exclaimed, striding quickly toward her. The crowd murmured in surprise. Daniel's heart lurched. The chairman, the most powerful man in the building, walked straight past the polished guests, straight past the line of high-ranking executives, and stopped in front of the very woman Daniel had doubted. "I was beginning to wonder if you had arrived yet," Sterling said, his voice laced with familiarity and respect. He extended both hands to her in greeting, as though welcoming someone of immense importance. The woman smiled, that same calm, composed smile she had worn all along, and inclined her head in acknowledgement. "I did not mean to keep you waiting," she replied softly. The entire lobby fell silent, watching the exchange. Sterling turned to the nearest staff and declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight's gala, Dr. Evelyn Hartman." A wave of astonishment swept through the crowd. Dr. Evelyn Hartman, the world-renowned economist, humanitarian, and visionary leader. Her research on sustainable development had influenced global policies. Governments sought her counsel. Corporations competed to fund her projects. Her words carried more weight than most executives' fortunes combined. And yet, she had walked in dressed simply, without any entourage, carrying herself with humility that made her almost invisible in the crowd. Daniel felt as though the ground had vanished beneath him. His mind reeled with the realization the woman he had treated like an intruder, the one he had ordered to step aside, was not just a guest. She was the central figure of the entire event, the person everyone was gathered to hear. Heat rose to Daniel's face, his throat tightening, his rigid stance faltered, and he suddenly felt the weight of every eye upon him. In that moment, he was no longer the commanding figure enforcing rules. He was the man who had nearly humiliated the guest of honor. He tried to steady his breath, but his chest constricted with embarrassment. His inner voice screamed at him, "What have you done? How could you not have seen who she was?" Yet, when his eyes flicked to Evelyn, she was not looking at him with disdain or anger. Instead, her gaze held the same serene calmness as before. There was no trace of resentment, no desire to belittle him, only quiet understanding, and, perhaps, even forgiveness. Her words from earlier echoed in his mind. You seem certain that I do not belong here. He swallowed hard, realizing the depth of those words. Now, he had judged her by appearance, by assumption, and in doing so, he had revealed more about himself than about her. Sterling, unaware of the tension that had transpired just moments before, gestured warmly for Evelyn to accompany him inside. Everyone has been waiting to hear your insights, Doctor. This evening would be incomplete without you. Evelyn nodded, then turned briefly to Daniel. For the first time, she spoke to him directly, her voice carrying softly yet firmly through the charged silence. Thank you, she said. Daniel blinked in surprise. For what, ma'am? Stammered. For taking your responsibilities seriously, she replied gently. Not everyone has the courage to enforce rules consistently, even when it is uncomfortable. The world would be safer if more people respected their duty the way you do. Her words struck him deeper than any reprimand could have. She was not mocking him, not belittling him. She was elevating him, offering him grace when she had every right to do otherwise. As she turned to walk beside Sterling into the ballroom, Daniel stood frozen, his chest tight with conflicting emotions, shame, awe, and a newfound sense of humility. At that moment, the truth had not only been revealed to Daniel, but to everyone watching. Power and greatness often wear the cloak of humility, and judgment based on appearances can blind even the most disciplined eyes. And Daniel, the strict, proud security guard, had just learned a lesson he would never forget. The echo of Evelyn's words lingered in Daniel's ears long after she and Chairman Sterling disappeared into the ballroom. Thank you for taking your responsibility seriously. She could have scolded him. She could have embarrassed him in front of the entire lobby. She could have reminded him and everyone else of the arrogance of judging by appearances. Instead, she had chosen kindness, grace, acknowledgement. Daniel stood at his post, shoulders heavy, heart pounding. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind. How calm she had been when he questioned her, how patient she had remained as he insisted she did not belong, and how, even in the moment of revelation, she had offered him respect instead of humiliation. The contrast gnawed at him. He had wielded authority like a weapon. She had wielded humility like a crown, and in the end, it was she who commanded the greater respect. As the evening continued, the lobby gradually quieted, and the stream of guests slowed. Daniel found himself reflecting deeply on what had just occurred. For years, he had equated discipline with dominance. He had believed that to maintain order, one had to project authority at all costs. Firm voice, rigid stance, unyielding rules. To him, strength meant never bending, never softening, never allowing anyone to challenge his position. But Evelyn had turned that belief upside down. Without raising her voice, without resisting his commands, without even a flicker of defiance, she had shown him a different kind of strength. A strength born of patience, a strength rooted in humility, a strength that did not need to announce itself to be recognized. Daniel realized then that authority was not about making others feel small. It was about serving a greater purpose with fairness and respect. Rules were important, yes, but so was the dignity of the people those rules were meant to protect. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp sting of humility piercing through his pride. And strangely, it did not feel like weakness. It felt like clarity. Later that night, as the gala unfolded in the grand ballroom upstairs, Daniel remained at his post. He did not expect Evelyn to notice him again. After all, she was the keynote speaker, surrounded by executives and dignitaries. But when the doors opened and the event concluded, she passed through the lobby once more. Their eyes met briefly in the crowd. Daniel straightened instinctively, his hand brushing the brim of his cap in a respectful salute. He did not speak, but the look in his eyes carried an unspoken apology. And in return, Evelyn offered him a small nod, her smile gentle, as though to say, "I already forgave you." It was a simple exchange, but for Daniel, it was everything. As the night came to a close, Daniel remained at his station. The weight of the evening's lesson etched deeply into his heart. He understood now that respect could not be demanded through authority alone. It had to be earned through character. He realized that appearances were deceptive, and true worth often hid behind humility. In the days and weeks that followed, Daniel's approach to his duty changed. He remained disciplined, yes, but his voice softened. His instructions became firm yet respectful. He treated every person who passed through his checkpoint with dignity, whether they wore a three-piece suit or a simple dress. He no longer judged so quickly, no longer assumed that someone's value could be measured by their clothes, their demeanor, or their status. For he had learned, in the most humbling way, that greatness often comes dressed in simplicity. And whenever he felt his pride rising, whenever he was tempted to wield authority for its own sake, he remembered Evelyn Hartman, the woman who had walked into his lobby, appearing ordinary, and walked out, leaving behind an extraordinary lesson. In the end, Daniel's story was not just about a security guard and a guest. It was about the universal truth that touches every human interaction. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. True power is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, humble, and deeply human. And for Daniel, that truth would guide his steps long after the marble floors of Sterling Heights had faded behind him.